Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Circworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where we create robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. You know, maybe you don't like robots or aliens or zombies, and that's fine, because we all have our own things that we're into, that we draw from, things that inspire us. That's what I like to do, and some of you guys like to do that stuff too. Or, you know, maybe you like to do pet portraits. Maybe you like to do landscapes. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, surely there are things out there that inspire you. No artist is formed in a vacuum, so we all gather things from here and there. We put them together to kind of create our style, or what subject matter we like to work in, and whatever that is, that's cool. So I'm curious. I mean, you guys have a pretty good understanding of what I'm into, and I'll tell you a little more about some of my personal, I guess, art heroes, or different artists that inspire me, and all that kind of stuff. Not just artists, but also, like I said, the subject matter, and films and books, and wherever we gather our different things that inspire us to create. But I want to know also what inspires you guys to create. Who are some of your favorite artists? Who are some of the people that you inspire to be like? Or maybe, you know, you're like, oh, I really like something that this artist does, but not everything they do, but I want to kind of take a little bit here, combine it with what another artist is doing, and kind of create my own thing. And that's really cool, and that's how we become sort of original, because there's really no, I mean, you can almost look at any artist and you kind of pinpoint their different influences and things like that. So that's what I want to talk about today: influences, inspirations, all that kind of stuff. We're going to do that live while I do another character design. This is another one of those role-playing RPG thing. My son's working on an RPG game, so I figure I'll do another character design from one of his games. But yeah, I want to talk about inspiration and all that kind of stuff. So let's do it. Let's get to it. I'll draw this. We'll talk in the chats. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Okay, sorry about that. If you guys were in the chat for the original, when I originally went live, we had some definite technical difficulties, and that's what happens when you go live. I didn't realize this, but I guess what the problem was I had my YouTube channel open, but I mean, all my speakers were off and everything, but apparently if I don't mute that, you guys can still hear it, even though I couldn't hear it at all, so I didn't think it would be coming through my microphone. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, C. Kim, I did see your super chat, so thank you very much. I know, you know, just that's commitment to give a super chat to something that was that bad, because I'm gonna have to go. Before I go and delete that, I'm gonna go and actually listen to it, because man, it sounded like I was just killing people's ears. So I don't know how many people I lost that were in the first thing that aren't switching back over to this. So I really do apologize. So I'm still kind of this is only my third live stream like this, and I'm kind of doing something a little different with it, where I've got some pre-recorded intros, and then the drawing is also pre-recorded, but I am here live talking to you guys in the chat. This just gives me an opportunity to pay a little more attention to the chat instead of just focusing on my drawing and everything. So anyway, that's what's going on. I am getting some of your guys' art influences in here, and a lot of them kind of match up with some of the people I wanted to talk about. Before I get into that, I'll just kind of give you an idea what I'm drawing. This is another character design for a role-playing game that my son is doing, and I don't want to get too much into that, because the last episode was dedicated to kind of creating characters and things like that, but I will kind of now and then kind of refer back to it, because that's kind of what you're seeing on the screen. So this is a character. They're sort of like a zombie race of characters, but they're not like mindless or anything. They can think and all that stuff, but they do kind of degenerate and then I guess regenerate and everything, but they're called the Decay. And this is just a character design for that. So just so if anyone's curious, that's what I'm working on. So before I kind of get to some of your influences and everything, I just want to, I guess, and I'd like you guys to let me know too, as far as what were even like from the earliest memories of, you know, because it was a while before or at least I really realized that
that there were different artists with different styles and things like that, and that people were actually creating this artwork, that it didn't just magically form. But my earliest memories, as far as how it relates to comics, and I do all kinds of stuff, but I do comics a lot, and I know a lot of people who follow me are also into comics, and a lot of the the influences and inspirations that are coming through here are comic book artists. But for me, it started with superheroes, but it was my earliest memories were reruns of the '66 Batman show with Adam West and Burt Ward, and then then there was like Super Friends, and also reruns of the old '60s Spider-Man, the one with the theme song that everyone knows, very limited animation. So that was kind of my introduction to like superheroes. So what I would do. The first memories I have of kind of drawing were I would get these coloring books, and a lot of them would be just, I don't know what they were just like, sometimes you'd get these coloring books that were, this had to have been before I went to school, because I remember drawing before I was actually even like preschool and all that kind of stuff, but you get these like, it was either like, what's the, like public service things, like, stop, drop, and roll, and all these weird little free handouts that they give you. But I would always take, and just like regular people, and I would put the Batman costumes on them, and so I was kind of drawing over these coloring books. So definitely, drawing outside of the lines and everything. And man, we're getting a lot of stuff come through the chat. I'm gonna have to dive into that deep. So I remember that, and then of course, the '60s Batman, I love it and everything, but it was super campy. But I remember, as far as before I started collecting comics, I went to a mall and I got to meet Batman. Of course, it was just a guy in a costume. It wasn't really Adam West or anything like that. But I got this record. It was Power Records. And you can Google this. You can listen to this on YouTube. It's on YouTube. But it was just Power Records Batman's, like from '75 maybe. And it had 4 stories. There was a Catwoman story, a Scarecrow story, a Riddler story, and a Joker story. And I remember, my only previous, introduction to Batman was through the campy sort of '60s Batman. And these were really dark. I mean, Joker was like killing people, and and just the voice acting in it. It was just so different and so dramatic and everything. And I was like, wow, this is like no other Batman that I've ever heard. And I believe, I could be wrong, but if it wasn't Neil Adams, it was definitely in sort of that Neil Adams style was the cover, and I just, I was really digging that. So that was probably my first introduction to that type of thing, and then later on I got into collecting comics, and I can get into that. But let me go kind of reference what's going on in the chat. I'm going to go back a little bit here. So let's see. Let's start getting into. So we've got, C. Kim says, Kirby, Eisner, Tim, DeCarlo, and Ed Piskor. Yeah, lately I've been, I follow Ed Piskor. He's more of a current artist, and if you haven't seen the channel that he has with Jim Rugg, and I think Tom Shuley is kind of the third, he's on there a lot too. But it's Cartoon Kayfabe. If you're not familiar with that, definitely check it out, because they just dive deep into comics and stuff like that, and they can be pretty critical at times. So I don't know if I'd ever want to put my work out in front of them, because they probably tear it apart. But I do like what they're doing, and I'm as a fan of, like, especially early hip hop. I was kind of around when hip hop first kind of came on the scene, and so I'm a big fan of Hip Hop Family Tree and everything, and and he pays a lot of homage to, like, things like Kirby and all that kind of that look. So I definitely like what they're doing. So you definitely check that out. And I don't, to be honest, I'd rather be drawing. I assume that's Scott. I'm not familiar with Jason Latour. I'm going to have to check his stuff out. Peter Palmiotti says Bernie Wrightston, Pete Craig Russell, Will Eisner, Ali Williamson. Most of those are on my list. I wasn't as familiar with Pete Craig Russell, but the other ones are definitely. And it's weird because a lot of these artists are like, you've never heard of, or you're not familiar with them, and it's weird. But sometimes things just kind of escape your radar. So sometimes you have to go in and look into that stuff. Keeman Monet says influencers Todd McFarlane, Knock, which I believe that's Todd Knock, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and the one and only Jack Kirby. Yes, definitely. I kind of fell out of comics, and in the 90s, it was kind of Image that kind of brought me back in. Because there was, you get into high school, and at that time, comics weren't, for me anyway, comics weren't cool. So, I was into girls and stuff, and so I kind of got out of comics. Sort of. I was still closetly, I was in the closet as far as liking comics and stuff like that. But I wasn't really collecting them. But it was after that I got back into it. And it was kind of that whole Image thing, and you can say what you want about some of the artwork there. I mean, I'm not like a huge fan of Liefeld, but they were bringing something. They were kind of bringing that emotion that Kirby had and everything. But I was definitely, I was into McFarlane, and out of all of those, I think technically Jim Lee was kind of, one of the best artists out of those. I also like Silvestri and stuff. So, but just what they added to comics and kind of, they really add a lot of dynamicism and stuff like that to it. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Victor Rodriguez says, Michelangelo, of course. I mean, if you want to go back to like classics and things, that John Buscema, John Romette, Chuck Jones. Yeah, man, Chuck Jones, definitely. I wasn't even really thinking so much of animation, but yeah, definitely Chuck Jones. I mean, it was interesting because you could watch a Chuck Jones. He was one of the few that you could actually watch one of his cartoons and notice a definite style to it, because a lot of those cartoons, I mean, they had to keep on model and everything. So, but for whatever reason, you could definitely pick out Chuck Jones's stuff. It was on model, but it was still very, I don't know, the outlines kind of had this kind of scratchiness to it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was definitely, it stuck out. But there's a lot of great stuff in here. Frank Frazetta, Larry Elmore, Clyde Caldwell, Greg Capullo, Wendy Pini. Yeah, I used to love the ElfQuest stuff. Alex Toth, yes, I was a huge fan of Johnny Quest, and Alex Toth did all the. I think he did most of the character designs for that. All right, that's my son's in the chat. He says I'm one of his influence. All right, yeah, that's fine. All right, so let's see. Peter Palmiotti says his first influences were newspapers like Peanuts, Dick Tracy, Gasoline Alley, Family Circle, and yeah. Oh, that's all good stuff. And yeah, so I bounced around. I was, huge into the newspaper stuff, and when I first discovered like Bill Watterson, when Calvin and Hobbes first came on the scene, and of course I was reading comics before that, but when Calvin and Hobbes came out, it was like at least, and it depends where you're at as far as your location and what comics were being published in your local newspaper. But in my newspaper, there's a lot of great stuff, but nothing like Calvin and Hobbes. He was doing stuff that I had never seen any, strip comic artists do before. Now, as I started to dive deeper, then after that I started to discover, Walt Kelly and Winsor McKay and a lot of the crazy panel stuff that Watterson was doing. You could see in Winsor McKay and stuff like that, but that wasn't being published, at least not as far as my newspaper then. So that kind of just jumped out as far as like just something that you'd never done. And the way he kind of switched, it was like the Real World in Calvin, where it was very, it was that kind of, not Peanut style, not Charles Schultz, but sort of along those lines. And then when he would imagine things, he would go into something a little more, almost like a realistic, like an Al Williamson or something like that, that was more what you would think of as like comic book style, very detailed. So it was very interesting how the real world in Calvin was cartoon, but then when his imagination was even larger than, I mean, not larger than life, I mean, it was just more realistic looking. So I love the way he did that, and like I said, no one was doing stuff like that as far as what I was looking at. So Watterson was like a huge influence on me. Yeah, and some of the stuff, like, I've got, you know, Matthew Enstrom says Jim Davis, Gary Larson, you know, that stuff definitely from a humor standpoint. I don't know if I, you know, like the Gary Larson stuff, I mean, he was brilliant as far as those one-strip cartoons. I don't know if his artwork, and there's a lot of stuff that you appreciate, but it doesn't necessarily find its way into kind of what you're doing or influence you specifically. I mean, there's a lot of artists I love, but their style, I never tried to like add anything from their style into what I was doing. So let's see. Europa Phoenix says Mobius, of course. Yeah, and I was kind of late to jump on the Mobius train, but you know, lately I've been reading or listening on tape to Frank Herbert's Dune, and I know early on Mobius did a lot of character design for the Jodorowsky or Yoder. I don't know exactly how to pronounce this. I think it's more like Jodorowsky's Dune, that big project that never got complete. But he did a lot of those character designs. So yeah, I mean, I was late to get into Mobius, but his stuff is really, I mean, it's striking. You can look at that, and it's like totally original and everything. Bruce Timm, oh man, I love Batman the Animated Series. In my opinion, the best version of Batman ever. That's all great stuff. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Yeah, thank you. I'd rather be drawing. I believe that's Scott. Let's see. So I'm gonna butcher these Japanese names, but Akira Toriyama and Katsura Odama. Yeah, I mean, and the same thing with manga. I didn't get into like, I'm still not totally into manga, but my as far as like manga and anime, my kind of intro to that would probably been like either like the Toho stuff, like the Godzilla, even though that was mostly live action, and also in the States it was called Battle of the Planets, which, what was it? It was super, wasn't what was it? Gatchaman, I think, in Japan. But that stuff, I mean, I know Robotech was kind of around when I was coming up, but I didn't get into that so much. But yeah, so I mean, and I'm not as familiar by name with a lot of those artists and everything, but I definitely, you know, I love that stuff as well. So who haven't I mentioned that we're fans of? So I mentioned kind of some of my early influences when I kind of actually got into collecting comics, other than just before, where I started to realize, you know, that there were such things as comics, or that these superheroes that I were into were from comics and everything. When I first started getting into, the first person I think I ever noticed as far as like a style was probably John Byrne, and because the thing that roped me into comics was Alpha Flight, because I had picked up a copy of Alpha Flight number, I think it was 11, and there was a cliffhanger in that issue where it said next issue someone was going to die, somebody on the team. And spoiler alert for you know, what's probably it could be as far as 40 years old by now, I don't know. But spoiler alert, it was the leader of the team, Guardian, who ended up dying, and that was like I couldn't believe it. And speaking of spoilers, there was a kid at school who spoiled it for me, because, and this is before I even knew there was such thing as comic book stores, but he told me who it was going to be, and I didn't believe him. So it's sort of a spoiler, but sort of I just thought this kid was lying, because that book was not out. That book was not out on the newsstands where I was collecting comics. I had just got the previous issue, but I didn't realize that the newsstand stuff came out, you know, almost a month later, or maybe a couple weeks. I don't know what the time difference is, but he had known about the comic book store, and so later I was like, "How did you know that?" And he says, "Well, I got it from the comic book store." And then that's when I was like, "What? There's a store that sells just comics?" So anyway, but Alpha Flight was my first introduction to actually like collecting comics, and after that I was kind of hooked. So I went back in, and then my cousin introduced me to George Perez, kind of when that came out, because he was doing Teen Titans, I believe. And at that point, I was more collecting. It seemed like more Marvel stuff than DC. But then when Crisis on Infinite Earths came out, and George Perez with just so much detail, all this stuff, I mean, that like blew me away. I'd never seen anything quite like that. So George Perez was another big influence. And then you know, there was also, you know, I mentioned before Al Williamson. I was collecting like this would have been before I was collecting comics, but I had the big giant Star Wars adaptations. And I remember at one point, you know, and I just went through these things and they were destroyed, but at one point I remember, this was another, there's a lot of firsts in these stories that I'm telling you, but I remember, I think my mom or somebody had told me that book, that big giant sized Star Wars adaptation, was worth something or whatever. And now I don't, it's worth something now, but it's probably not worth as much as it was then, because I don't know, it's sometimes things, the value will jump up in the beginning because people are holding on to these things and you can't get them anymore, and then afterwards they kind of, the price drops low. But anyway, and I was like, oh, this is worth something, and by that time mine was just destroyed. But I never really sell any of my comics anyway. I like them too much just as a personal thing. But that's sort of an aside. But anyway, so Al Williamson, I had discovered him probably before, but I didn't really, again, at that point I wasn't really noticing style. I just noticed that he captured the look of, you know, the characters in Star Wars really well. And then later on I got more into his stuff and everything. So I'll continue on with that, but I want to go back. Let's see, what else? Keeman Monet says Frank Miller is another good one. Yeah, I was never, I mean, I was more, I guess, into Miller as sort of a whole thing, both the writing and the art. There were a lot of artists at that point where, you know, you kind of had your typical style, and then certain people came out and they started to do something, some crazy stuff that you didn't see a lot. The first person that kind of comes to mind was Bilson Cabbage, because I remember at the time I was like, oh, what is this? This is so unique and so different. And I mean, I loved his stuff from the start because it was just like nothing I had ever seen before. But I remember in the beginning, there were a lot of people, a lot of backlash, because like, what is this? This is so bizarre, and I remember a lot of people didn't like it. But since the beginning, I was like Bilson Cabbage's stuff, and now obviously, you know, he's sort of a legend. So, and then the stuff he did with Frank Miller, like I've got the Daredevil graphic novel, and yeah, all that stuff. Another one, I think we mentioned it before, or somebody did, but Bernie Wrightston is another one. I mean, if you've ever seen his Frankenstein book that I gotta get a copy of that because I don't have it. But man, that stuff is just like brilliant, and a lot of stuff he was doing with Swamp Thing and everything. But as far as people that kind of were doing something different, I remember, I'm trying to think, like, it seems like for whatever reason, I think like Bill Sienkiewicz, and then I noticed like Howard Chaykin, he wasn't, I mean, his stuff was noticeably different, but not to the extreme that like Sienkiewicz was. But there were some different stuff that definitely you could see a very unique style going on there. And then also because I was a fan of Alpha Flight, and it started off with John Byrne, and then the second artist to jump on that book was Mike Mignola. But at that point, he hadn't really found that kind of style that he's famous for now, with the blacks and the, you know, just that real chiseled look that he's so famous for. But even then, when he came on the book, I was like, oh man, this guy's really cool. I noticed the change, but I don't know. There's something about even his early stuff that was nothing like what you see now that I really liked. it seemed I don't. It's almost like the total opposite of what it seemed. Very rounded. His character seemed very like, I don't know, soft. I guess you'd have to look at his old stuff. But the juxtaposition between his early stuff and then kind of what he's famous for now, like night and day. So when he started to make that transition, I didn't really like it, even though it was very unique. But now it's like, now I can sort of appreciate it. And it's the same thing with like Kirby. In the beginning, like I hate admitting this, but I've heard this a lot of people in my demographic or age group say the same thing, that when they first saw Kirby, they just didn't like it because Kirby was already famous. He had already created all these characters and everything, and by that point he was kind of a little older, and then some of these other artists came on the scenes, and a lot of us didn't really get Kirby. But it wasn't until later that I just like really understood Kirby and appreciated what he did, and just the action and dynamicism and everything that he brought to comics. And it was really, I mean, I'm ashamed to say that in the beginning I wasn't a huge fan of Kirby, but I definitely am now. So, that's interesting. I didn't know that Amanda Connor was a model on the Elektra Assassin. So that's another one. Yeah, that's another one I forgot to mention, the Daredevil. But I have I have that first miniseries of Elektra with Frank Miller and Bilson Cabbage. That stuff's great. Sean Gordon Murphy, which is a little bit more recent. I think Corey Kerr. I know Corey Kerr's a big fan of his, and I think he might have some of his original stuff. I'm not sure, but yeah, his stuff's great. There's so many. I mean, it's really you can look back and you can see when you look at like early, even like Flash Gordon stuff that Williamson was doing, the amount of detail and everything that went into that. So you can look for a lot of that back then, but it seems like nowadays, in order to just be noticed as a comic book artist, the amount of work and detail and craft that have to go into these pages for the amount of money that people are getting paid is just. I mean, I think nowadays, the like I said, the amount of time and everything that goes into making comics and everything, it's pretty much like. Like almost like no other time. I mean, because you look at kind of, right before I started collecting comics and stuff. It's even if you look at like Ditko stuff, which is great, but it's not. It just doesn't have. It doesn't look like he spent like hours and hours and hours toiling on with the minutia of all this detail and stuff like that. But now it's just like in order to be seen, you just got to put so much into it. So, yeah, I mean, some of the artists today, I mean, I just look at, and I don't know all of them by name, but I mean, there's just so much good stuff out there. It's kind of unbelievable. Let's see. Let's see what we got. So, let's see. I'm kind of looking through here some stuff. We got, okay, Scott, can it be anything that influenced? Yeah, stories, yeah, all that kind of stuff. Because another thing that I want to mention, and although he did draw, but most of his stuff, most of his drawings were just kind of in his sketchbook. But one of my major influences was just Jim Henson. I mean, for what he created. Another one would be like Walt Disney, of course, which both of those guys drew, but you don't really see much of their artwork. It's the imagination that came out of that. So I mean, I would say my biggest influence across the board would be probably Jim Henson. Of course, just Disney and Disneyland in particular. Just the stuff that the Imagineers do, the stuff in the park, the storytelling that goes on in that park, and all I've been watching stuff on the new Star Wars land that opened up, and you see all the storytelling and everything, all these little nooks and crannies, and every little element tells a story. And to me, that's amazing. So yeah, it doesn't have to be comic, it doesn't have to be artists, it doesn't have to be comic book artists. It can be anything that influences you at all. I mean, things that you just see out in the world that find its way into your artwork. I think it's just easier to kind of pinpoint certain artists and everything. So what else have we got? What else I was going to talk about? Oh, another thing. Well, let me kind of go back to kind of the drawing too, just kind of let you know where we're at. So we're just doing some digital penciling and everything. We've got this is the it's from my son's role-playing game that he's doing. A character. It's a race of characters called the Decay, which are sort of like zombies. But they're sort of thinking zombies. I think at one point he was in the chat. Maybe he can explain a little more what those are if anyone's interested. But anyway, so this is sort of my version of one of those characters, and I'm doing this in Clip Studio Paint. I think I keep getting confused if it's Clip Studio Pro or Paint, but it's Clip Studio Paint. So doing a little more digital drawing and everything, and then after that I'm going to print this out, and I'm going to ink it traditionally, and then I'll start coloring it in with some alcohol markers and everything. Got Galen in the chat. Hey Galen, how's it going? Let's see. I'd rather be drawing. I love your taste. Okay. So people talking amongst themselves. So yeah, but I was going to get into another thing that influenced me a lot was, especially from an early age, were children's books. And for me, there's kind of the big three, the three S's. There's Syndax, Silverstein, and Seuss. So those guys really influenced me as far as the work that they were doing. Another one like Richard Scarry was another one, and here's something that I really, and I don't do so much of this anymore, but it depends what I'm working on. But I'm really a fan of all the, like, you'll see this in like Richard Scarry, or even like Mad Magazine, when you look at like Jack Davis or Mort Drucker with their parodies and stuff. All the little details and things that you just have to search for that some people might just overlook, but all the little humorous things and everything that are put in there. But with like Richard Scarry, I mean, he would kind of have these maps and things like that. And I like to do, I'll do like blueprints, and I like to do all these little annotations. Like, have you ever seen the blueprint drawings I do, where it's got the little lines that kind of point to what certain things are and kind of call it out and everything? I love doing that kind of stuff, and I want to do more of that. But when I, at the last Artcasters, we did a whole thing on Mad Magazine and some of the influences. Mad Magazine was a huge influence on me personally, but I had done a lot of. I haven't done so much lately, but for a while I was doing a lot of caricatures, and I was doing mostly for like corporate clients and things like, they do a Christmas card and they want to have all their characters, and I would try my best to do my Jack Davis or Mort Drucker impersonation, and it was never quite as good. But I do pride myself on some of the other stuff that I had kind of seen that other people were doing as far as caricatures and that type of thing. A lot of them didn't have that, all the little details and stuff that I tried to put in there. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff, and definitely those. Jack Davis, Mort Drucker, all those guys were huge influences on me there. So, let's see. Keeman Monet says Alphonse Mucha. I'm not sure if I'm familiar. Yeah, I kind of feel weird. Like I feel like uneducated as far as art, as far as when people pull out names that I'm not familiar with. But I'm gonna have to check that out. Peter Palmiotti says, I'm sure I read children's books when I was tiny, but I remember when I was a little older reading Hardy Boys. Yeah, I mean, the painted covers, and that's another thing. And I'm not a painter by any stretch of the imagination, but I do love looking at even like the Gold Key. If you look at that Gold Key era of comics where they had the painted covers, and I mean, you see a lot of that now. I mean, there's so many nowadays with all the variants and everything. You see a lot of like really impressive covers. Like I was buying the new Stranger Things comic book that came out, and there's so many variant covers on that. But the ones that I picked out were were almost like a sort of a Struzan type look to them, you know, that movie poster look. And that's another thing. I mean, even though I don't do that kind of work, I mean, I just love looking at like Struzan stuff, and then what, you know, I'm trying to think, you know, and from there, just like, because you don't see that much anymore as far as movies, and I can go into a whole kind of aside about where movie posters are and how much I kind of hate like the movie posters that are in the theaters now, because it's like you look at like the Marvel movie posters and it's like, oh, we got to get people to come in here. We got to get people to know that these big movie stars, you know, like Robert Downey Jr. are in there. So you never see Iron Man with his mask on hardly in the movie posters. All the characters have to have their mask off, and they do that in the movie too. And I understand some of that has to do with the acting and emoting and stuff, but you know, I was about to give out a spoiler for Far From Home, which I'm not going to do, but I almost did by accident. But yeah, I mean, it's like, it's so, you know, the idea of the characters, you know, it seems like Spider-Man's taking his mask off all the time. It's like somebody's gonna notice him, you know, that this is Peter Parker and everything. But they do that because they want to show you the actors and everything. But to me, I don't know, what sells the books to me, because a lot of the actors they cast, I think they become movie stars, and I'm getting a little in the weeds here, but just indulge me for a minute. But a lot of the actors that they cast are not big name actors when they're cast. They become big name actors because they're in these movies. Like even Robert Downey Jr. I mean, he was a name at one point, but when he got cast, he wasn't in anything. I mean, he was a very risky decision to make. And when Favreau decided to cast him, there were a lot of people that just didn't want to, because he was so unreliable, because he had his, you know, past, you know, problems with drugs and things like that, and not being very reliable. So even Robert Downey Jr. at the time was like not really somebody that was a marquee name that would draw people in. But I don't know. I just, and it's all like photo bashing and things like that. And I don't want to I guess I don't want to take away from anyone that's designing those posters, because I'm sure I know there's an art to it. But I miss kind of the action stuff. Fortunately, even though we don't really have those in the theaters, we can look to like what Mondo is doing and really designing these really cool movie posters and everything. And having said that, another one of my influences more recently, especially you might be able to see some of that in like when you look at my prints and everything. Would be like Tom Whalen, if you guys are familiar with his work. He's a kind of a poster designer. His stuff is great, and then if you even go back to, you know, just early graphic design, back to like Saul Bass, this movie posters he was doing, and his stuff is so great because it is so simple, but it's all the idea. He had like the best ideas, and he summed them up so well. So if you're not familiar with Saul Bass, definitely check out some of his stuff, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's see. I get that photo bashing is a thing and a concept, but personally loathe it as a technique for illustration. Yeah, I mean, I also like with the photo bashing stuff as concept designers. That I understand, because that stuff you got to put out so fast that it's easier just to drop a photo in and kind of go over it just to get the point across of what you're trying to do and everything. So we got a Superman animated cartoon by Fleischer. Yeah, that stuff was also a big influence on, you know, kind of what, you know, Bruce Timm and everyone was doing with the Batman animated series. You see a lot of that repeat through there. Let's see what else we got. I think I got some stuff. Okay, let's see. Got some mentions of the Art Nouveau style, which I love. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people do that. Like they'll do like fan art, but they'll kind of give an Art Nouveau look to it. I like that a lot. let's see. Okay, besides artists, what made me want to be a storyteller were Disney movies, Aladdin, Atlantis, Lion King, Pocahontas, the cartoons, Danny Phantom is what got me into science fiction. Yeah, that is stuff that, yeah, Disney animators, you know, that stuff, you know, whether it's Glen Keane or just the Nine Old Men, but yeah, that stuff. And I you know, I can see another, we kind of were talking about like the whole image kind of explosion in the 90s, and you know, kind of after that first wave, the people that started, the artists that started it, you started to get people like Travis Charest, who kind of came from more of a graphic design background and had a really unique take on what, you know, comic art could be, and also J. Scott Campbell, who is very much influenced by like Disney and stuff like that. You can see like just the emotion and stuff in his characters and everything. Definitely had an animated look to it. So let's see what else we got. Yeah, so more on the Art Nouveau stuff. Hold on, I'm gonna take a drink real quick. So let's see. I'm trying to think more recently what I've been getting into. So you know, the latest story that I did, I tried to do stuff a little different. But if you look at like the work I do on Young and the Dead, it's a little more like cartoony. And from that, you know, I was a lot of what influenced me in sort of early on as far as comics were, there was like, still to this day, Art Adams is probably, as far as comic book stuff goes, he's kind of the one that I look at and marvel at the most. I just love his stuff, and I loved it from the first moment I saw it. I mean, it really stood out and everything. There was also like Michael Golden, and I don't know who. I'm trying to think. You know, but those guys, they kind of had a little bit of a, I don't know. There's humor in there. It was very detailed and everything, but there was some humor and stuff in there. I think that I think I try to do anyway with my stuff. I mean, like a lot of like Young and the Dead features like kids, so it's a little. But you know, I don't do in that book. I don't do a lot of dark blacks and stuff. So it's very kind of, you know, it's got more of a, I guess, a line art style, a little looser and everything. But I do want to kind of dig into doing a little more detailed, and I try to do a little of that with the 4-page story I did for the anthology. So yeah, I mean but like modern like artists right now that I'm really digging, I usually pick up anything that Guri Huru, which I believe is a team of artists. They did a lot of the Avatar adaptations to comics, the Last Airbender Avatar, and I think they had a run on Gwenpool, and I just pick up those. I pick up those just because I just love the art. It's very animated style, very clean. I like Sean Galloway, who's also known as Cheeks. I like his stuff. So, but see, I kind of go in waves. Like, you know, right now is kind of those two influenced me a lot. But now I want to try to look into other things because I want to do a little more detail stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's good to kind of go back and forth and like get into certain artists, kind of let a little of that kind of find its way into your style, and then move on to something different. That way it's constantly evolving, and it doesn't look so much like any one artist in particular. So let's see. Okay, Victor says, my elementary school reading books had awesome illustrations, and various artists. Or the Reading Rainbow books from the 80s were awesome too. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. I remember there was, I forgot what it was. I think these we get these little things we had to do book reports on, and there was one that was it was a story. I think it was like the story, like the what is the Gift of the Magi, but it was told a little different. There was this like imp in a bottle and everything. I remember that from school, and I liked that story so much I basically just ripped it off. Like when I first started kind of making my own comics, like I would sit on my, you know, the floor in my bedroom or just on the carpet and just draw comics. I wasn't even at a desk. I just sit at the floor and draw comics and make comics and everything. But that was around the time there was a series. It was sort of short-lived, but it was Steven Spielberg produced this anthology show called Amazing Stories. And it was kind of like, sort of like the Twilight Zone, but it wasn't necessarily as like dark. It was a little more fanciful. But anyway, but I would just be like, because I would see like on the shelves there'd be these adaptations of stuff that was already out there. So, you know, I didn't know anything about copyright. And then, of course, it didn't really matter because, you know, no one was seeing these comics but me. I didn't actually publish them. I was just drawing them. But I made my own version of Amazing Stories. And I took that one story that was kind of based on the Gift of the Magi with the imp and everything, and I just kind of redid it in comic book form. And that was kind of, because there was a good twist ending to it and everything. If anyone knows that story, it was kind of like, I'm trying to remember how it worked. And I did a couple of those. There was another story. It had something to do with the Fountain of Youth or something like that. I don't know. But I would just take these unique stories that kind of had a twist to them, and I would adapt them into this sort of Amazing Stories format. But yeah, so I mean, I would do that too. So I definitely, I mean, even though I didn't even think about that, I was influenced by some of the illustrations and stuff that I saw in textbooks and things like that. Let's see. So we've got Charles Dana Gibson. I've got to look him up. His ink drawings are gorgeous. Yeah, I've definitely got to look that up. Let's see what else we got. Yeah. Sorry, I'm slowing down the live stream. Just looking through. It's Cold Echo says, and that's my son Parker. Ken Sigmora was an influence for me. Lead character design for Pokemon. Okay, yeah. I definitely, now that you mentioned, I didn't know him by name, but I've definitely heard, seen stuff on his stuff, and yeah, that's got to be a huge influence for a lot of people as popular as Pokemon is, and a lot of great character designs there, and just character designers in general, people that do work on movies and stuff that you don't necessarily see, or not even character, but just concept designers. Ralph McQuarrie, obviously, because I'm a big Star Wars fan. I've actually got a signed Ralph McQuarrie book. I'm glad I got the chance to meet him before he passed away. But that stuff, sometimes those guys don't get as much recognition as they should. But people who just create, somebody more current that I really dig, and you can watch his channel, is like Steven Silver. He's got a very unique style. You can see, he did a lot of stuff for, I think, Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. I know he did the character designs for the adaptation of like the Jay and Silent Bob, or the Clerks cartoon, which is a really good cartoon. Didn't really last very long, but it's definitely got a unique look to it and everything. So yeah, Sid Mead, another concept designer. Yeah, let me know your concept designers so I can look into that. Okay, so Peter Palmiotti's back with some more. We've got Dale Keown. Yeah, when I first saw his stuff, I was really into his stuff with the pit thing that he did. I remember the pinup that they first used to advertise that book. I was like, whoa, what is this? And I wasn't really familiar with what he was doing previous to that on Hulk or anything. Silvestri, I mentioned Silvestri, Jim Lee, Travis Charest, Steve Rude. And there is actually, if you have Amazon Prime, I haven't watched it yet, but it's like on my queue. There is a documentary on Steve Rude that I want to check out. So if anyone's curious, I think it's called Rude Dude, but there's a documentary. There's a lot. I was surprised how many comic book documentaries and just pop culture kind of documented. And some of these, I've watched a few of them, and some are kind of hard to get through because they're just like somebody's passion project that they interviewed some people. So some aren't the most well like produced, but if you're into that kind of thing, I think you're really gonna dig some of that stuff. But once you dive into some of those documentaries, then if you do have Amazon Prime, then you're the algorithm will start feeding you more of that stuff. And there's tons. I can't believe how much stuff. I just watched the documentary on Image and how it started, and that's just such an amazing story that really, I don't think they could replicate it. I think maybe some of the stuff that's kind of happening with some of the the crowdfunding and everything might be similar as far as people breaking away and doing their own stuff. So I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get another age like that with what happened. Dale Keown is insane with his hatching technique. Yeah, I mean, the hatching and that type of thing is something that I've always struggled with. So I just kind of try to avoid it because it just never looks right for me. But I've seen people that the hatching and the feathering and everything. I don't like Kevin Cross, who somebody a lot of you guys know and that I know. So I mean, I love his style of inking. It's very, he's so good with that sort of feathering, the way he trails. I just wish I could get those type of lines that he gets. But yeah, I know he's influenced. There's a lot of people that influence him that you could probably point to. Kim Jong-gi, yeah, I mean that's like, he's like something out of this world. It's like, how does that guy do that? But then you realize that stuff can sort of be learned, because I watched a couple people that are really influenced by Kim Jong-gi. Like if you, is it Chris Keiko? He has a YouTube channel and he talks a lot about, he goes to different shows and everything. But Kim Jong-gi is one of his influences, and he does that same technique where it's just all free-formed out of his imagination, and he's pretty good with it. And then another one who we can go back to the Image days is Dan Fraga, who he's got a YouTube channel. His stuff, it seems like it's kind of infrequent, but he can also do that thing where it's just kind of, he just starts drawing without any underlying sketches. To me, that kind of stuff blows me away, but it does. As much as I look at what Kim Jong-gi, and he's sort of the master. I mean, he's way ahead of some of the other guys that I talked about, but you can see that yeah, I mean, with enough practice, this is something that you can do. He's just put so much into it. But yeah, I mean, that's just a genius. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely not shy away from calling Kim Jong-gi a genius. So yeah, it's just amazing what he's able to do. Yeah, let's see. Okay, yeah, and Keeman says that they're introduced to him through Chris Keiko, Kim Jong-gi. So yeah, let's see. Yeah, got a lot of Chris Keiko love going in here. I should reach out to that guy, maybe see if I can get him on the Artcasters, because I don't know him at all, but I've watched a lot of his videos, and he's got a lot of good advice as far as exhibiting at shows and things like that. So let's see. Let me turn my attention back to the drawing. Right now we're getting into the kind of adding some colors and everything. The marker that I'm using right now is the Chartpak Ad markers. These are my favorite markers. The only thing is, usually when I do these, these will work fine for this, but I've noticed that they tend to bleed when you make copies, because there's also other illustrations that I'll do. Like I've been doing, like when I do a marker comparison, I'll go to like a Office Max and I'll get copies made, and then so I can do a side by side, so I can show you what one marker does and what another. But when I do those, I notice that sometimes because the ad markers aren't like the regular alcohol base, they're xylene base. So as much as I love them, sometimes they will kind of smudge, so I have to kind of watch out for that. But I love the tips on these. They hold a lot. They're not refillable, which is kind of a bummer. Now I'm getting way into like markers. But anyways, I just kind of want to let people know what's going on here. So with this character design here, let's see. Okay, so let's see. He often streams on Twitch. So are we talking about Keiko? I'm not sure. Or Kim Jong-ji, I'm not sure. Let's see. It says I should shoot him a message. I'd love to see him on the Artcast. Yeah. I've got a short list of people I want to get on the Artcasters. The only problem is it depends kind of where people are located, because Josh, he works as an art director by day, and he's got a long commute, so it takes a while. Once he gets back, I mean, he just can't. We got to do these late shows for us, like on Pacific time right now. I mean, I'm in Arizona, so we fluctuate between Pacific and Mountain time. Right now, we're on Pacific, so yeah. But so sometimes people on the East Coast, and I don't know where everyone's located. Sometimes artists they're okay with like staying up late, but sometimes we have some problems. Every once in a while, we'll sort of try to make it like an hour early. I know we did that when we had Brian Allen on, because I really wanted to talk to him, and like that was difficult. And I'd love to have him back on, but it's just it's hard for us to do that. It's got to be like, for us, the time that we do that is got to be like 9 p.m. Pacific time, because it's just otherwise it's really hard to do that with Josh's schedule and everything. So, but I've got a list of people. I want to start reaching out to some other people and get some new people on the Artcasters and everything. And speaking of Artcasters, we're really trying to figure out what we're gonna do, and we got to jump on this quick because Google Hangouts is ending August 1st, and I've already noticed that they're starting to take certain features away. So it may end before that. I don't know, but that's what we've been using, and that's like the easiest thing to use. So we've got to find another way to do that. So I don't know exactly what we're doing. If you guys know, if you guys are doing something different, we have tried. We've tried. What is it? Discord. And we had major problems with Discord, so maybe we just don't know what we're doing. But we tried that with the 48-hour art check and just can't get it to work. I know there's some ways to do it through, like right now I'm doing this stream through OBS. So we'll just have to see. There's got to be some way to do it, but I don't know if that's going to require us like purchasing something or what. Yeah, Tim says OBS. Yeah, I just got to talk with Corey. Says we can do it through OBS, but I don't know why if we can do it through OBS, why Corey was switching over to Hangouts like when we couldn't figure out how to work Discord. So we're actually going to have tonight we're going to have Corey. We're going to have two guests tonight, Corey and also Jim Lujan, because they're both animators, both very different, but we want to talk a little bit about animation. So hopefully maybe beforehand or after or at some point I got to like pin Corey down and see if he can show me how to do some of this stuff. So let's see. Yeah, what we got? Don't like Discord, too many forums to navigate through. Yeah, I mean, that I don't know too much about. I'm kind of new to Discord, but just the fact that the audio was dropping and we had some problems with that. Hey, there's Marsh. Let's see. People keep saying that they're not taking Google Hangouts away. They're just rebranding it. I've heard that too, but I'm not going to. Because if that was the case, they should have rolled something out or let us know. But I'm not gonna count on that being the case. So there is a Hunters channel on Discord as shown by Mike Emirates. I gotta look into that. Let's see. So let's see. We're getting a little further on this character. So I don't know if Parker is still in chat, but I'm curious what he thinks about this character, because these are characters that he created, and whether this is kind of something that he thought about. If it's looking like, you always wonder that when you create characters, your interpretations. Like I said, I was doing. I've been listening to Dune. and I kind of like, oh man, I want to do my own kind of fan art interpretation of Dune. But then I saw that Jake Parker recently did the same thing, and it's like I don't know, I don't know if it's like, you know, because sometimes I get comparisons to Jake Parker with some of my mechanical sketches and stuff I do. So I don't know if I really want to just repeat something that he's done. And he kind of had a really cool interpretation. So I don't know. It's interesting. Let me get a drink real quick. I'm trying to think if there's any inspirations that I neglected to mention. Yeah, I think I mentioned a lot of the ones. Oh, obviously Eisner is a big one. That I don't know if I mentioned Eisner. I know a lot of other people threw it out. I remember when I was in college getting I forgot the name of the book. It was something about sequential art, but it was written by Eisner, and that was an excellent book. And I really like one of the things I really liked that Eisner did was when he used text, like illustrative text. And like I do a lot of logo designs, but I tend to gravitate more towards illustrative logo. I mean, I've done like corporate stuff, and I know how to take something very simple and make it, you know, give it that impact. But I also like doing like logos particularly like logos for like apps and like games and things like that. That's you're trying to do something a little different. Like when you brand a company, the idea is just to make something that's simple, recognizable, that people know. But when you're doing like games and things like that, it's a little different where you want to do more illustrative. And a lot of that, you know, I can look to what Eisner did with type, because he would have these, you know, the titles and everything, he would just work the titles into like rocks and things like that. And sometimes you saw George Perez do that quite a bit. I always liked George Perez's rocks. Obviously, you know, he's brilliant as far as designing characters and lots of characters and having them interact and everything. But I really like his rock work and stuff, which is kind of weird. But another aside, talking about rocks, and I mentioned before one of my influences were like the Disney Imagineers. If you guys are more, I know a lot of people are more on the illustration sides, but if you follow design at all, if you're not familiar with the podcast Adventures in Design, Mark Brickey, who runs that podcast, I've also been watching what he's doing. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's really doing some cool stuff on YouTube. He does a lot of Disney stuff, but he just did a whole video just about the rocks in Disney and the reason why they're there and how they're designed so they can separate the different lands. So once you're in a particular land, all you see is that land. You don't necessarily see, like, you don't see Tomorrowland from like Frontierland and vice versa. And now everything is done, a lot of that is done with rocks, and what the purpose of those rocks are, what they're hiding, what's behind them, you know, whether it's a freeway or a convention center or whatever. I mean, it puts you in this world. So but check out the Adventures in Design YouTube channel if you're curious about stuff like that, or check out his podcast if you're not already, even if you're not as much into it, because they interview a lot of illustrators too. But it's kind of, there's this weird disconnect between, like, I found between like artists that are into like comic book stuff and or illustrators that are into like comic book stuff and illustrators that are more in the design space. And I like to find a way to kind of bridge those gaps and introduce those groups of illustrators to each other, because I think we can all learn from that stuff. The people that do more graphic illustration as opposed to more comic book style stuff. So try to branch out and as long as we're talking influences, that's some other good advice. No. So Victor says rocks aren't as easy to draw as people think. No, they aren't, and I can attest to that, because I really want to create these great rocks, and sometimes they just look like they're just all jumbled up, and they don't, like, it's difficult for me. I mean I try to do my best, and I think I can do all right, but that's another tattooing. There's a lot of, and I don't know hardly any tattoo artists by name, but a lot of you know, when I'm looking for inspiration, like sometimes, because on the side, one of the major ways that I bring income is designing like rubber stamps. And when I look for inspiration, a lot of that because I'm looking for line art, because the stamps are all black and white. So a lot of when I look for inspiration, what I stumble upon are like tattoo artists. And unfortunately, a lot of those we don't know, if you're in tattooing, I'm sure you know a lot of who those people are. I just don't, and that's another thing that just what I was talking about, that we may not be as familiar coming from comic books to what's going on in the tattoo industries and stuff like that. But there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of garbage. Like I've seen a lot more bad tattoos than I've ever seen good, and that's probably the reason why I don't have tattoos, because I'm real nervous that I'm gonna get I'd be getting a bad one or whatever. But there's a lot of great stuff too. So I mean, it's like. But yeah, I mean that's something that we can look to as well. There's so many different areas that maybe we're not thinking about. But yeah, I would try to branch out and discover, get out of your comfort zone. That if you're really into comic book stuff, start looking into more like the graphic design posters and stuff that's going on, like in the Mondo movie poster space and the gig artist space. And vice versa, if you're in that space, you're looking at more like look to more of the comic book artists or any of this stuff. It's all great stuff. So let's see. I haven't tried it yet, but a possible replacement for Hangouts could be Microsoft Teams. Okay, that might be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know that there's still ways to stream through. YouTube still has functions, but the biggest problem is is just getting other people on. All right. So I'm totally blanking. I know you had the nickname. I'm gonna butcher your name again, but Nefertali. I know I'm butchering it, but I forgot what the nickname you said you wanted me to refer to you as. So let me know that. So I apologize for that. Because it was a lot easier to say. But let's see. So the superhero genre was from Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, animated cartoons, mostly Batman Beyond. Yeah. Again, all that stuff. The kind of inspired by that kind of that Bruce Timm look and everything. And I'm still wondering if they're ever gonna do like a feature of that Batman Beyond, because I think that's an interesting direction to go. Zoom works well too. Using school. Yeah, I joined a hangout with Diane Gibbs, who's a graphic designer, and I might join.
All right, so here is the finished drawing. Once again, this is a version of a race of character called BK from my son's role-playing game that he's working on called Fable Seed. Interesting because I always talk about how one of the things I like to draw are zombies, and they're sort of like zombies. They're not mindless. I assume they're pretty intelligent and everything, but they are kind of degenerating and things like that, or regenerating, all that kind of stuff. But interesting idea for characters, and it was fun to kind of work on something like that. But yeah, so that's that. That'll do it for another live episode. Let me know, one thing I want to know on these things are other topics that you want to cover, because I want to have, when I do these, I want to have sort of a central topic, but I mean, we can branch off and talk into different things, whatever you guys are willing or wanting to talk about. That's cool. But I do at least like to start off with a theme. So what are some of the things that you guys want to cover on future live streams? Let me know in the comments section. Thank you for everyone in the live chat. I'll see you guys later. That is all.
Go to Soapworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.